afraid of it, or what do you think?
He's afraid of the bill.
All right, if I could get everybody that wants to join us for adult class into the auditorium, we'll get started here in a minute. You doing all right this morning, Betty? Yeah, you look like you're doing all right. Uh-huh. Yeah, how else can I say that more threateningly?
If you don't come in for class, we'll clean the building after services.
The doors will be locked.
I don't know if that's a threat. They might just have a good time out there.
We will be giving you all of the kittens and small children we can find.
There you go.
That is,
Have you seen the ones on stores that said unattended children will be given candy and a puppy?
Oh,
I like that one.
if you don't come join us for class, we will round up all of the feral children and puppies from the community, and you can take them home.
My feral children are not for sale.
No, not yours. We'll find some other ones. They're out there.
Just go down to the skate park.
Yeah.
And tell me there aren't days where they're not for sale.
Oh, there are days, in my opinion.
I was to say there are days that they're for sale. We tried to sell them to Harold and Courtney several times. He just doesn't want them.
Nope. Not because they're your children, just because they're children.
Feral children, puppies in the community.
Well, no, we should actually pay you to shape them. And that's not that's
Oh,
remember child support.
yeah. I thought you were talking about babysitting, but no, you went way farther than that. Okay.
No, remember that conversation we were having after lunch one day?
You just thought it was about babysitting.
All right, guys. Well, I wasn't here last week, so I think Larry took charge, took over, and you guys talked about divorce. Am I right? Okay, cool.
What was the consensus? 'Cause I missed it.
Well, what's the consensus? We're all getting divorced. I don't think that was the consensus. So just because I wasn't here last week and I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to move to a new topic or not, I figured we'd continue this discussion a little bit. But that being said, I don't know exactly what points you guys hit, so I'm going to let you kind of, oh, that's a dangerous way I was about to say. I'm going to let you kind of guide the class a little bit, carefully, with respect. Okay, there you go. But kind of what points did you guys hit last week talking about divorce? What were some of the topical pieces, I guess?
Well, the Catholic divorce, it's generally not so much anymore, but usually carries a long stigma.
Okay.
And
One of the things we talked about was the fact that those of us who are divorced have heard the whole thing of, if you love enough, you can save a marriage. And the truth of the matter is, if one person chooses to walk away, there's really nothing you can do about it. And even the scripture talks about that, that if somebody walks away, it is what it is. You cannot change somebody else. You can only affect your own behavior.
Yeah. Nancy, did you have something there too? I didn't want to miss you right away.
I think it says, like, if you live with an unbeliever, do your best to convert them, but if they, should teach them or whatever, but if they leave you, it says to let them go. But I got a divorce because my husband was, he was a chronic alcoholic, which is not an excuse, but he cheated on me a lot. A lot, with men and women, so, yeah, I had to divorce him. And so I think I'm justified.
Well, and I think, and I want to hit a couple of things you guys hit there, but I think often we look at it as can we justify or can we not justify? That's usually the route that we go talking about divorce. And then that brings the second conversation. The second conversation is, are you able to get remarried or not? And that's, again, just a justification or a non-justification, right? An ability or an inability. And so I think a lot of times we hang out there, but that's kind of missing the point, isn't it? Because that's what we do on a lot of these Don't Press. We're kind of missing the point because we want to hang out if you can or can't. So to Dave's very first point here, if we look at what God, his perspective on divorce, God's unchanging. And if he says something in the New Testament to the Old Testament, I think we could say that that is kind of his perspective throughout all of time, right? And I'm saying that carefully because there's detailed things he gave in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, in Malachi chapter 2, it says, or Malachi records that God says, "For I hate divorce," says the Lord of Israel.
We did talk about that scripture,
Mhm.
and we read the entire, looked at the entire chapter.
Sure.
And said, it's not just talking about marriage.
Okay.
It's actually talking about the church, it's talking about God and his people, it's talking about faithfulness. So there's more to that than
Just the
than
marriage
a man
part.
and a woman being married.
I think that's good to zoom out and take that perspective too, because we always think of divorce when it comes to marriage, but divorce can also be in other pieces of life. We just won't use it there in our culture, right? Yeah, we call it a amicable separation, or leaving the church, or turning your back on God, or however you want to. You could use it on anything, right?
Even secularly,
Yeah.
dissolving a partnership, something like that.
Yeah, that'd be a very professional way to say it. Courtney, did you have something there?
I was just gonna say falling out.
Falling out, sure. Yeah. So I think the main perspective, and I struggle with this one, many of you probably have had many conversations with me. God desires for even his people to be with him and his people to be together in lots of different ways, and that's where I'll go with your comment there. And marriage is one of the most sacred in his eyes, right? This is two people that have come together under him for life. And we're not necessarily talking about the marriage perspective, but the marriage perspective, even in our culture, in words, is for life, right? I'm not saying that's how we enact it in our culture. But the fact of the matter, I'll come to you next, Nancy, is divorce is a very relevant topic. Depending on what studies you look at, some say 35% of Americans are divorced. Others say 55%. So pick whichever one you want, however sad you want to be. Depending which study you look at, within the church, some studies say 35% are divorced, or some studies say 55% are divorced. So it's just as relevant for us as it is for the rest of the world we're living in our modern culture today. Now, I think the reason you kind of get some different answers on that is I think that divorce rates are coming down, but marriage rates are also coming down. So
Yeah.
if you're not married in the first place. Did you have something else on that, Renee?
No, I was just gonna say, less people are getting married, that's why
Yeah.
there's less divorce.
So the latest study type thing that I looked at from Barna is people are most definitely at least waiting longer to get married, but that's kind of just a cultural thing we see. People are waiting longer to do anything, to move out of mom and dad's house, to get a house of their own, to work a job, whatever it might be. That's just kind of our cultural shift. So at least we have the stats to say that people are waiting longer to get married if they get married at all. Nancy.
So does God recognize two women being married and two men being married? And if so, does he not want them to get a divorce?
He does not.
Okay, wait, that's a very loaded question. Okay, let me work through this. So we're going back to the homosexuality thing, right? That's what you're saying, homosexual marriage?
Right.
So, the first part of the question is, I'll let you guys answer it. Does God recognize that as a marriage? Why not?
He says the definition of a marriage is a man and a woman.
Let's see if we can find it.
Just needs an attitude.
That's just a tough one to say in our culture, right? Because we've put this label marriage on a lot of things. So, oh, come on. This is what happens when you aren't prepared for Nancy's comment right here. Scripture, help me out. I think we could probably go back to Genesis chapter 2, right? That's where most people go. Genesis chapter 2, probably verse 20-ish. Just looking at the first man and woman. So we'll pick up in verse 24 of Genesis chapter 2. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, or woman, depending on your translation, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife, or woman, depending on your translation, were both naked, and they were not ashamed. So this would be what we would call the first marriage But do you notice what's not in there that we would have to have in America? Like there was no legal documents. There was no ceremony necessarily, except for commitment, right? Leaving the father and mother, that's a commitment to this new person. So you gave that to a modern American, and they might not even consider that a marriage. So,
Considering there are only 2 people alive.
yes,
Considering
they
where-
invited everybody.
Considering where one of them came from.
Yeah.
They invited everybody.
God married them.
Yeah. So, on that, do we have to wrestle with the American definition of marriage? I mean, that's up to your heart and if you're really convicted, but I don't think the American definition of marriage necessarily hits God's points all the time anyways, right? It's more a paperwork thing, which is sad to say, because it's so much more important than that. Dennis and then Nancy again.
Marriage between man and woman, like God designed that you just read from Genesis, that's how it was so when things were right. But to answer Nancy's question is, God, he recognized females getting married together, Oh yeah, he recognizes all light, for sure. He hates it. There's things in the Bible that says they're sins, or they're wrong, or this or that. But that's one of those things in God's list of abominations. It's there with child sacrifice and idol worship and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Sodom, the very word sodomy comes from the town of Sodom, and it's what it was a whole culture of homosexuality, and God hated it. He still does. Both covenants, you read right on to the end of the Revelation stuff about heaven and hell and everything, and those are in the list that are going to get roasted. I don't think it's something that, as I've seen our churches get caught up in things over tiny nothings about what shape of communion cups they can have or whatever, and then even tolerate the question of, well, does God like our 2 boys to make love? Good grief.
Well, and
Are we messed up?
when we talked about homosexuality too, and that was kind of the piece that, again, you can take or leave what I say whenever, but that was the piece that I really wanted to point out when it came to homosexuality. It wasn't necessarily a temptation or a desire that is sinful before God, but it would be the action, right? And so we kind of briefly mentioned marriage. Marriage in a homosexual thing, first off, it doesn't fit the definition. But second off, Kevin's not in here, cool. Second off, a valuable piece of marriage is the sexual relations, right? And so if we're saying the sexual relations are the part that would be sinful before God, if you're practicing that homosexual relation, then you're missing part of marriage. That what would the point of it be? I'm not saying that's the only point of marriage, but I think it's a big part. So when we talked about homosexual, we hit that a little bit. Nancy, is yours connected or is it a different thing here? Because we're on a little rabbit trail, so either way, I'm good. It's okay? Are you sure?
I just went back, I was just thinking about Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
That God brought her to the man. I think that's,
I think he created her specifically
Mhm.
for him.
Oh, yeah.
Check it out all
and then
together.
brought her. I'm just wondering, we always say, just be patient, it's all right, be patient to worship. When the person is there, you'll know, because it's like, God brings people in your life like that.
Yeah. So, you got the exact right wording, both of you guys, right? Because for Adam, man, there was found no helper for him. And so God, I'm going to see, I have to jump down. And so God brought her to the man. He made woman and brought her to the man. So absolutely, created for him. Created for one another. I'll use that wording. Absolutely. So we know that if we look at Scripture, we can kind of see how not our modern definition of marriage is kind of missing the point sometimes. And I think that even just with the paperwork side of things, like I get to take the paperwork to the courthouse. That's a part of my job, right? And it's not really that fulfilling. It's like, wow, that was great. Like, I don't even see an ID or anything. I just hand the envelope that we signed, I signed it, they signed it, we're good. And you're married. And you could do that anywhere, anytime, like just meet me, I'll do it for you, but it's not that fulfilling, right? And so I think even our modern definition of marriage is tough on that. But now we're going to the other side of it, and that's where you guys hung out last week. The other side of the unity is the separation, right? Is the divorce that we are facing in our culture. And actually, I would say it's much more difficult to get a divorce than it is to get married. I mean, we have multiple people that would be like, yeah, that's definitely true, right? And that part of our culture might, paperwork-wise, be a good thing, I guess. But how do we navigate as Christians who live in a world with people that are getting divorced and a church with people that are getting divorced? Like I said, those stats are about the same. How do we navigate that? How do we love and continue to work as the church through that sort of stuff? What are some tactics we should be putting into place?
I think Jen mentioned it last week on the fact that there really aren't all that many unforgivable sins. If I look back on being divorced and say, did I do absolutely everything I knew how to do at the time? The answer is yes. Can I look back from 30 years and say, were there things I could have done differently? Now I know that, yes, there were some things first of all, not getting married. But there were some things that I could have done differently, yes. But if we understand that people are doing the best that they could at that time, then even if we consider that a sin, we forgive that and we move on. As the church, one of the absolute, no, I'm going to say as Christians, one of the absolute worst things we do is make people feel guilty about choices we disagree with.
Like way back there, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter when they did it, it doesn't matter where they did it, it doesn't matter how something happened, the circumstances. I had a woman told me that her husband was unfaithful to her and beat her and she stayed married, so I had to stay married as well. And actually, I mean, not in so many words.
Yeah.
I mean, literally said those things to me as a 21-year-old that was in an unfaithful and abusive relationship. That's devastating. And the reason that I remember that is because of how devastated it was. And
Yeah.
on the other hand, on the other side of that, I had church people who were loving me through it, who were bringing me groceries because I had no money. So I've seen both sides of this, but as a church, we are so down on this is a public thing. You can't get divorced quietly.
No.
You can be an alcoholic quietly. You can be a drug abuser quietly. You can, some of those things. So because this is a public one, we pick on this one.
And I would even say, as far as like sexual relational sins, this is pretty much the only one you could struggle with and it not be private, right? Even if you're struggling with it, people start to know right about that point, right? So you can be a child abuser sexually, and people don't know about it. We've seen that in our culture a lot for 20, 30, 40 years, right? But a very good point there is, on the other side, back to the front end, now that you're looking at it with tons of years, like, yeah, you can maybe figure out what you could have done better, but time has passed a long time, right? And so the very best piece of that was maybe not get married. Yeah, we need to think about that a little more. It's a very serious choice. All right, Jen, and then we'll come back to Kim.
I think it's James that talks about being careful about how we judge because we don't see the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think as members of a church, we try to give advice or help people when we're not seeing what they're going through. So I think we need to be very careful about that. God sees the whole picture.
Yeah.
We're seeing what we want to see. And I think we've got to be careful in a situation like that, especially in a situation of divorce because emotions are already out there. I think we just need to be careful. I think we can love them through that. If they ask us, what am I supposed to do? What does the Bible say? Tell them. But as far as judging them, I'd be very careful.
Yeah. And even from I get to deal with this more than I'd like to, it seems like, but you never get, as humans, we never get exactly all the information, do we? Like, either I hear it from you and I got all your information, I see it from me, I have my own slant on it, or I hear it from them and I got all their information. None of them are enough information because they're all our own perspectives. And so that's really, really tough. And then the fact that I have to work with that or you have to work with that, we enter ourselves into that too. And like, I just don't like it. It makes me feel icky. So now I'm already negative, right? And so things like that are a big factor. Kim.
I was gonna say, I fulfilled my marriage commitment, says till death do us part. I was dead inside, like, I was, so therefore, I just fulfilled it.
Kim. You're supposed to give me stuff I can work with.
Well, clearly,
I'm glad.
I wouldn't be sitting in this church if, I was still married to my ex.
All right.
We wouldn't have been baptized.
So I'm gonna hang out on this. You guys might not want to. You might just take me a different way. To me, I think like we were talking about. Yeah, God frowns upon for the very simplest way to say divorce, right? I think also all of us have pasts. Some of us have kind of more dramatic pasts than the others. Some of us did not kill our ex-husband, which is where I thought that comment was going. Last week I checked, he was still alive. And then we'd have to change class to what's worse, murder or... Anyway. But this is kind of a perspective I hold, and people can disagree with me, but you become a new creation when you come into Christ, right? The old things have passed away. That's straight out of Scripture. And sometimes, like Terry was talking about, we even do this to people who were never in God's family for the first part, right? And we say, well, and I've seen this happen before. You're welcome to disagree with me. I've seen this happen before. People become Christians. They go to a church, and that church says, well, you were divorced back then, way before you were Christians. You guys each need to get a divorce again and go back to the original people, right? And so for me, I'm not going to tell you one way or another. I'm just saying, for me, when you become a new creation, the old has passed away. And any of those sins, because we're talking about divorce specifically today, but I know there's people with way worse than divorce back there, right? Because we classify things like that. So for me, that's not even a topic of discussion if it was before you became a new creation. All right, Barb, and then come back over here.
Okay, in my case, I was blessed with a small congregation where I was living when I finally said, no, I can't do the meetings and the infidelity and everything
Mhm.
good anymore. And every member of that church wrote me a letter. Every member. And they put it in a big envelope and sent it to me, and I want you to know, telling me how much they agreed with me, I was doing
Okay.
the right thing. Please, we wish you the best with your future, and never feel that you did the wrong thing. And I'm telling you, how a congregation reacts, if you still love the person, no matter what happens, you still love the person and show them, hang in there, we love you. That says more for Christian people than anything you can do. And if you have someone that is doing things that are wrong, if you give up loving that person, whether they be biological or fellow Christians, if you give up on them, what hope do they have? You have to continue loving them and not talking down to them and tell them what a piece of garbage they are.
Yeah. That is very difficult, though. Not because you want to call them a piece of garbage, though, right? Because, like I said, I get to deal with stuff like this way more often than I would like to. And there's not a checklist of the things that are just the right thing to do. And that's tough. Because, like you said, the most successful thing you can do is, how would Jesus love this person? Just keep asking yourself that checklist over and over again. Because, I mean, the checklist doesn't exist of the exact right thing for every situation, and if it did, it'd be wrong for the next one. So that's just tough. That's just really tough. But I think the perspective of how would Jesus love them.
Yeah, but you have to have boundaries too.
Yeah, right, because another problem we can run into, especially for someone like me, let's say a woman got divorced, I have to have some boundaries there to make sure I'm not getting myself into any situation. Because people are hurting, and when people are hurting, they're stupid. And that happens, that no matter what the kind of hurt is, right? All right, Jordan, and then Dennis, and somebody else maybe.
Yeah, I just gotta kind of follow up on what Barbara said about, how can we, where's the hope for that person? And it should be the other way around. Where's the hope for us? Because where are we interpreting where God's mercy is? Where the sacrifice of God's Son on the cross has limits. Where, oh, well, if you're divorced, then, yada, yada. All sins are sins. And if you're gonna say, oh, this over here ain't covered, then you're blaspheming God. You're blaspheming His sacrifice of His Son, perfect lamb. You can't sell that short. But if you do, you're reaping judgment on yourself. You are blaspheming God, and His power, His ability, and His Son's sacrifice.
Dennis, I'll let you go right off that. I'm looking at-
What we discussed here today, and last week, I think somehow kind of missed the mark of your series where we started out, what are things we prohibit that the Bible does not?
Or does it
And,
or does it not?
The Bible at least deals with the subject of
Mhm.
divorce quite a lot, quite heavily, and quite seriously. So it's not an item like cigarettes or, mixed swimming or whatever, that churches have made big deals and split over, or somebody's opinion of are there degrees of heaven or hell, and stuff like that. Divorce at least is a topic. I don't know if it really fits into the idea of our series, because it is a Bible topic, no matter what way you look at it, Old and New Testament both.
Yeah, and I think you said this early on, and I appreciated it. Some of these topics are within the Word pretty strongly, maybe medium, and some of them just aren't even there, right? And so this would be one of the ones that is within the Word pretty strongly even. Like I said, we went all the way back to Old Testament, but let's go New Testament for a second. Did they ever try and trap Jesus with divorce?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank goodness it's not just modern day preachers. It was Jesus himself, right? Yeah, they tried to trap Jesus with divorce. And one of his responses in Matthew chapter 5, verse 31, he tells them what they're already trying to tell him, right? He says, it's also said that whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. So he says, what's your law? Well, your law is you got to have the paperwork, right? And he continues on from there in verse 32, though, and this is in the mix of talking about lots of other things. Let me say that, too, for the context. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery themselves. So he took their answer and gave them something they really weren't expecting at all, right? I don't think that Pharisees were expecting an answer about sexual immorality right then. They just wanted to know, hey, can I do this or can I not? What's the answer? It's not that easy. It's not that simple. And so this is where people hang out quite often. And this is, again, Harold doesn't have his head wrapped around this. Some people are mad at you if you don't have an answer on this, okay? I don't have an answer on this. I don't have my head wrapped around it a lot. But he does bring up sexual immorality as something that breaks the bond. And so if we're already going off of divorce is more than just marriage, sexual immorality is the divorce of that connection. That's Harold's saying of it, right? And so he's going deeper than the matter of paperwork to try and get to the heart of it. Larry, did you have something there?
Well, yeah, on this topic, if we look at the standard that we should apply, and the most perfect example is what did Jesus tell the woman at the well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you don't know the story of the woman at the well, because maybe you don't, he comes up in the middle of the day. That's not when anybody went to the well, right? So that means that this lady who was there was the outcast. She didn't want to be seen. She didn't want people to see her. He goes up, he starts talking to her. Another thing you don't do. Men to women, different nationalities and everything, you don't do that. Starts talking to her, what's the topic that comes up? Where's your husband, right? Where's your husband? Don't have a husband. You're right. You had a bunch of husbands. And the guy you're with right now, he's not your husband. So that was an easy answer, right? So he even starts talking to her about this. But what is the outcome of the woman at the well story? I'll let you guys answer that one for me.
convert the town.
What's that?
They convert the town.
They convert the town, go and Sid No More, and I'm gonna go on Terry's even. She goes back, starts telling people, and they convert the town, right? And so, what would Jesus do? How would Jesus love on a person? He talked to her about divorce for just a second. He didn't label it that, but he did label, like I said, you've messed up a lot in your life. Going on from that, right? I had some more hands here. Courtney, and then Greg. Courtney, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do.
Okay,
Harold and I almost broke up over divorce.
which is ironic.
But anyway, I don't want to dwell on anything too much. Sorry, my phone. I just want to point out something that I was reminded of this past year is God, we see in a pattern all through the Old Testament. God has a deep love of justice, of right and wrong, and it's hard. There's a lot of hard things, but like, it's a balance. I really believe that. I think so many things in the Bible are a balance, the balance of grace and law, the balance, but of God has that deep sense of justice. Like, you shouldn't be getting beat or berated or abused in your most intimate relationship, but at the same time, balancing.
Because he doesn't want that broken necessarily. either.
Yeah, there is a balance too of though, divorce can break things and it's not always our fault, you know, it's not always, it's just hard, it's hard knowing, I don't know, and I've never been in that situation because Harold's really great, so, not,
Thanks for that review. And that's kind of why I pointed out, Jesus went deeper and he went to sexual immorality when the surface level question was just divorce, right? And this is where I wrestle, because people ask for advice often, like, my husband's beating me, my husband's cheating on me, or vice versa. It can be the other way around, and maybe it's even something less severe than that. What is the proper advice? It's a tough one sometimes. And so, and con to Courtney's part, whether it's sexual immorality or abuse, is not that bond already being broken? I don't know. That's where Harold doesn't know what advice to give sometimes. Greg?
I kind of went off on the wrong subject then, Harold, but the lady at the well,
It's good.
she went on and had an incredible ministry through of Christ, her family and that town, and they were all martyred, but, you know, that was an event.
Mm-hmm.
That was an event that changed her life and actually changed thousands of people's lives. As she went to Africa, she went up into, I think, Rome, but that day was phenomenal for her. And then I'll just say real briefly, we're talking about being faithful to our loved ones. The word says to flee from temptation of having or having sex out of marriage, period. Fornication, to go, run, flee from it. And that's important. I mean, it keeps in perspective how important our marriages are to one another and how much we should respect and love one another. That's scary. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
For
Absolutely.
goodness sakes, that's very important.
Henri?
I see two extremes, and one extreme is that if I just live with them and don't get married, then I won't get divorced.
Right, no problem.
No problem then. And then I see the other extreme that I faced in Alaska when I was told, and this shocked me, but I've heard it since also, is that every woman that the man has slept with, he considers his wife. And I want to say, well, did you support him? Did you do anything? But he considered every woman that he had ever had sex as his wife. He didn't consider divorcing them. They were just his wife, and just because he wasn't with them. But that was the way he justified it in his eyes. We have a tendency to justify things instead of trying to go to the Bible and do things God's way. And that's what's really scary is when we live with somebody so we don't get divorced, or I stuck with her, so she's my wife, so I can go sleep with somebody else and she can be my wife. And so we take things very liberal?
Man, that's I had never heard that one because that would be multiple wives in his brain, right? Or vice versa. You could flip it around, multiple husbands. Courtney.
Just, I guess, kind of along those lines, like, I like to call myself Church of Christ royalty, because we can, like, trace our lineage back to the Civil War of Church of Christ. But, like, I mean, I can't think really of any marriage that I wanted to emulate as a kid. You know, I mean, abusive or slanderous or publicly treating each other poorly, and that's all public stuff, you know, and it's like these people who are so hardcore, like, you are sinful, you've divorced, how evil, and they've got crappy marriages because they don't even take care of the one they've got, but they can judge other people. Sorry, I don't want to throw them under the
No.
bus, but.
I'll go to Dennis, and I kind of want to build on a couple of these things here. Because what's the so what? So I'm going to go to Dennis here first.
Well, a lot of those things are, it was very common, marriage, divorce, remarriage, unmarried, in the time of Christ and the apostles shortly after. In fact, when the Pharisees, whatever, come up to Jesus, he said, there's this wife, and she married 7 different, on and on. Jesus didn't say what some of our people do. Well, it was pretty much, polygamy was over with by the time of Jesus. Are you saying that Roman Empire improved the moralities? That pagan Roman Empire improved the morality better than what was before that, down to one man, one woman for life? I think if we'd really studied Roman history and stuff, we'd see polygamy was still big for 200 or 300 years at least. And for practical reasons and maybe some leaven of the church, if you will, brought down but it was pretty common. And so we get into what I really wanted to say. I think when Paul's talking in church leadership about the husband of one wife and like that, he's saying he's not a polygamist, at least that. Or he's not a flippant marriage and divorcer. He's a guy that's dedicated to one woman for life. He's serious, because this is how he's going to treat your church too. He's going, if it's just a whim for him, he's probably going to do the same thing to your congregation. And like that is, I'm reading into Paul there, but but the deal about the husband of one wife on eldership, that was, we need to keep that as one of our things when we're selecting recognized leaders for the church, like elders, deacons, and like that, because it was big to Paul and Jesus, or the Holy Spirit needs to be big to us. And I think there is a difference between, can a pew sitter still come legally and sit in the pew with a divorce background? I would say yes. Can he be in the charge of the church? I got my scruples, hardcore.
Mm-hmm. We'll go into the kind of the point of polygamy / divorcing. You bring that to the church. If you're going to be a leader of the church, you don't want somebody that's running with multiple churches. And you also don't want somebody that's going to just leave a church, right? And so if you're looking for leadership, I think that's a great description. And we've talked about that before, but I do think that's a great description. So the so what is the tough part, right? We came with Barb's so what? What if someone's divorced, they walk through and they need help? We love on them. I think that is a great so what to come out with. But what about trying to proactively fight against divorce? Because what we're talking about here is the after effect. We're talking about the point when it's over and after. I think the greatest so what for us as Christians should be the way before that. And this is the part that we kind of miss as Christians and as churches often is we need to be the examples of what good marriages and good relationships, kind of like Greg was getting into. Multiple of you guys kind of hit that there. We need to be the example of what a good marriage and a good relationship is in Christ. And that's why I like to heavily hang on the fact that you are a new creation after you come, because many people have been divorced before they are Christians. But now you have the opportunity, if you're married or you're looking to get married, or maybe you should figure out if you really want to get married. All of those are opportunities now to show what Christian relationships and marriage look like. To teach our children, to teach one another too. I mean, you can be 35 and somebody's 30 sitting next to you, and you have learned some more things about marriage as a Christian than they have. Or maybe they're not married yet, right? And so there's a lot there that we need to focus on that side of it. Instead of the coin after it's done and gone, do we kick them out or keep them or love them or hate them? Nah, whatever. Let's worry about how do we take care of this before it's ever an issue. Jen and then Nancy.
So I was gonna say the same thing Terry said, that we need to teach our children when they're little what marriage is. And on the opposite side of divorce is, the process before you get married. The Bible talks and gives rules. You don't wanna be married to somebody who you're pulling in different directions from. It says, that your oaks are
Equal, yeah.
I mean, there's rules. If you can't love somebody, or if you can't, abide by what God sets in place for husbands and wives, don't do it.
And one of the topics up here is celibacy. It's the one that's we're resting on right now. That's actually something that we don't talk about often, but that can be a positive Christian trait too. I'm not saying you need to go do surgery or anything. I'm just saying it can be a positive Christian trait. Nancy?
Well, I'm just thinking about when I was younger and I met my first husband. I was so naive, I was so ignorant, I was so stupid. I just rushed into something because I loved this man. And I didn't think about, what are you doing? This guy is an alcoholic, he's a womanizer. I'm like, oh, but I was so naive thinking that I could change him. And I just look back on my naive self, and I wish that I had been taught, or I was led, or, because I grew up in the church, and I just wish that I didn't make that huge mistake. I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, how do we prevent our young ones from going into a relationship that's a bad relationship, and it's a bad relationship, it's really tough.
And that's why I think we need to hang out on the live the example and do the best you can, because kind of at the point, if somebody's already decided they're going to marry a train wreck, it's pretty hard to get them to choose differently, right? But that being said, and I kind of want to leave us with this because we're about out of time, so you might be hearing that and say we need to be good examples for our children, we need to be good examples for our Christians around of what dating and marriage and sexual relations can look like. So part of that is you might be saying, well, we need to talk about it. That's good. Yes, we need to share with one another. And then you might also be thinking we need to be perfect. And I don't think that's necessarily true, okay? Because that's a very human trait to go, well, I got to be perfect so I can show people, right? But some of the greatest teaching examples can be how you work through the imperfections, because I bet you have them. I bet your marriage has them. I bet you're dating, like Courtney and I said. We almost got a divorce over divorce before we were married, right? And so it's like some of those things, how you work through them and how you share them with others, whether they're your kids or just a brother or sister in Christ, that can help. The best way to grow together is healthy fighting, right? It's not fighting at all. I have questions when people say, we never fight. I'm like, you ever work through anything? Yeah, which one of you is a pushover, right? Brenda, did you have something else?
I'm just going to confirm where Dennis talked about commitment last week, and that is something we need to understand when we get married. That's a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many Bible examples of most of the marriages in the Bible was arranged. They were not fallen in love. Most all of them were arranged. That's why they were taught to love your husband, because they didn't fall.
Didn't come
in
right
love.
away.
But you can see, like Abigail had a drunk husband, and she did not leave him. Esther was the wife of the king. Sarah was told by her husband to lie that he was not her husband. She was told to lie that he was not her husband, so that she could have other men come in on her. It was one of those things that they were committed, no matter what their husband told them. They were committed, and they had to learn to trust God in a lot of it.
And
Sarah had to trust God. That's why we are told to be like Sarah, to trust God.
And again,
God did
those are,
protect Sarah.
Those are all examples of working through the imperfections of a relationship, right? That we can even look at. Greg, that's got to be it because I'm out of time.
It'll be quick.
All right.
And thank you, Harold. Well, I was thinking back about my parents when I grew up, and the divorce that they went through was devastating for us. But I think as adults, when we get married, we have to be so critically careful about going through it correctly, because those same examples could grow onto our children, to their children, and it will be just a generational thing. Like, for instance, my father and my mother, when they'd get in an argument, my dad would leave Idaho, and he'd take me with him. And so when I first got divorced, first married, I'd come to Wyoming. You know, like, and I realized what I was doing what I saw, and that's a very dangerous thing. And so as a parent, like when I talk to my children, I'm just like this encouraging guy, you know, going, hang in there, you know, it's so important because it can just roll on forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really can. And it started probably at my grandfather or my great-grandfather. And it's just learned behavior, and it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
It really can.
All right, on that note, you had 2 weeks of discussion. I wasn't here for one of them, so that was nice for me, I guess. Let's see where we go next. I'm terrified of this spinning wheel, by the way. Is there more to talk on that we didn't get to talk about today?
I think so.
Nah, respin it.
No.
If we lived west of here a ways, then you
Well, in the Old Testament, that's very hard.
I don't want to. I'm just going to move on. We'll spin it again. Watch it just land on the same thing. All right, gluttony. That's something that's completely new. Sweet.
Are you going to consider that an outcome or not, or just up for discussion?
I'd like to
Yes.
point out it's potluck.
I'll consider it both. All right. Yeah, it's potluck week. That's perfect. Cool. Everybody's going to be in line like, I'll have a pickle slice. That's it. All right. See you guys next week.